It's that time again. The annual conference of the American Society of Ag Consultants, otherwise known as ASAC, is going to be held in Fort Myers, Florida, this November 4th and 5th. Kurt Covington is one of 9 professionals who will address the conference. The other speakers who will cover a wide range of topics represent Florida Farm Bureau, Florida Citrus Commission, University of Tennessee Institute of Agriculture, National Ag Law Center, Risk Mitigators and Advisors, Tyler Associates, as well as the lead economist for dairy at CoBank, and myself, Chrissy Wozniak from North American Ag. The day and a half of presentations will be followed by ag tours on Tuesday afternoon at Echo Farms, one of my favorite places here in Fort Myers. Attendees will experience farming at its most creative, with unique demonstrations, plants, and techniques being used to help farmers and urban gardeners in developing countries. A second tour at Echo will showcase simple technologies that can improve food, water, and shelter for millions of people. A third tour of a hydroponic grower is also being planned. For more information and to register, visit www.agconsultants.org. That's www.agconsultants.org. See you there. Our sponsor today is Morning Ag Clips. Morning Ag Clips is America's #1 daily ag news service, designed to be a quick and easy read. It will help you stay up to date on the important headlines in both local and national agriculture every business morning. You can go to their website at www.morningagclips.com to sign up or peruse the headlines. Connect with them on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well. Your Morning Ag Clips will help to keep you in the know. And welcome to the North American Ag Spotlight. I'm Chrissy Wozniak. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with an Indiana native who has spoken to over 2,400 audiences in all 50 states and 7 countries on the topics that he knows best: business and agriculture. He's a graduate of Purdue University. He also studied comedy at the Second City, Chicago. He's a member of the Screen Actors Guild and National Speakers Association. And he's an author and host of 2 podcasts. All of this, and he's still an Indiana farmer. I'd like to welcome Damian Mason. Welcome, Damian, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Chrissy. Thanks for having me here.
So can you tell me a bit about your farming background? What do you grow? Where are you farming?
Well, calling me a farmer is being very generous. I rent out the bulk of our property here. I have about 280 acres in Indiana. About 205 of it is in cropland that I rent to a large-scale dairy operation. I manage the timber. I've had at times a beef operation out here selling beef for, private, people that want a quarter of beef for their freezer. I used to make a little bit of hay with my brother, but he was a dairy farmer as well, but he's passed away. So I really couldn't justify owning the hay and forage equipment for the little bit I was going to do. So that's what happens. I was raised on a dairy farm here. All the trappings of your normal basic 1970s and 80s farming operation. We milked about 60 cows and had your cement stave silo. We farmed about 500 acres. Most of it was rented. So yeah, I now own the home property where I was raised as well as where I live, and that's what the farming operation consists of. So like I said, we rent out the bulk of our stuff now. It's one of those things where about every year I come up with a new idea that I should do some little new venture in agriculture out here. But the reality is I cover the road when meetings are allowed to happen, speaking at agricultural events all over North America. I also have a new venture with Extreme Ag. That's a group of high producing, forward thinking farmers. They do a lot of product trials and a lot of business practices. So I'm producing content, video and things, podcasts for them as well. So really, I've got plenty of things that are pulling at my time, plus a few other little ventures I have on my own. So between that and trying to get good at golf and taking care of my 2 dogs, I guess I've got plenty of things going on. I also live half the year in Phoenix, Arizona. So that's kind of it's kind of how the farming operation works around here. So that's it in a nutshell, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's pretty well-rounded life. I like it. Well, so we're going to jump in. There's so much happening in the world right now, and it seems like all roads lead back to agriculture, and you have a great connection in the industry. So I'd like to talk first about what you're observing out there. Let's start with the supply chain. What are you hearing and how bad is it really?
It's not as bad right now as it might get. Let's talk about it from everything, from the bacon on your dinner plate to the farmers. Sorry, to the farm level inputs. Especially with this involvement that I have with extreme ag, I've got some of these guys that are farming 10,000 acres, so I've got a pretty good finger on what they're dealing with. And the word is there's going to be huge price increases on inputs, the stuff that these farmers are putting on the ground. Fertilizer, nitrogen is going to be a little bit more than double priced next year from what it was this year. Phosphorus, I think they said, is up 70%. So you just start going down the line. Then there's talk now, are we going to be able to get glyphosate? Now, of course, the folks filing lawsuits and the environmental working group that makes its money off of opposing modern agriculture would love for us to not be able to get glyphosate, but there's going to be a lot of unintended consequences,
I think they like eating too.
Pardon me?
I think they like eating too. So that's
right. So, the environmental activists and the activist groups that essentially use ag as their whipping boy so that they can make money from their donors, dream of a day when we don't use chemicals or fertilizer. Well, that day may come if we somehow get this whole regenerative and organic thing figured out. But in the short term, that would be devastating for a lot of people, particularly at the bottom half of the economic spectrum in terms of food availability. So it's my understanding that we're going to see a lot of stuff at the farm gate that's going to be in tight supply. I have a group that I call the Business of Ag Success Group that you're going to be speaking to on Wednesday. And folks that are ag professionals from all different aspects of agriculture are in my group. And they pay me a little bit of money, and we put on meetings for them every 2 weeks via Zoom. So the good thing about having that networking group is that you hear from different areas of ag that one side doesn't even know what the hell's happening on the other side. Well, for instance, one of the guys is involved with a bunch of ag retailers. And what's going to happen on the ag retail level that a lot of people don't realize is they're going to be paying exorbitant amounts of money. So they're not going to be gouging these farmers. They just themselves can't get their hands on stuff. So my man, Jim, that's in this group tells me that the containers, the stuff that just a metal box that gets on a boat from China to here is like 5 to 7 times more expensive now to move that container than it was just a year and a half ago. Wow. So China has us over the barrel. That's frankly our own fault, from pickup trucks where we got pickup trucks here in Indiana because we make a lot of pickup trucks here, stacked like cordwood. They're built, they're done, except they don't have a computer chip. And so this is a big topic here, Chrissy. If you've got a $45,000 pickup truck or $50,000 pickup truck, and it's completely unusable because of this little chip, that chip is now worth $50,000. That's what a lot of folks don't get. It's like, no, it's not. It's worth $13. Well, if you can't run the truck without it, it's worth $50,000. And China really knows that. There's an old saying in business: when you owe the bank $1 million, the bank owns you. When you owe the bank $100 million, you own the bank. And that's kind of the same situation when all of our eggs are in one basket. When our biggest customer, as well as our biggest supplier for ag, is China, I think we should be a great deal more alarmed than we are. I have been sounding this alarm for several years in my speaking engagements, that we just sit there very passively and like, oh, well, it's great. Just keep making more soybeans because by golly, them Chinese are going to buy them soybeans. Well, eventually China does not want to be our customer. They want to be our replacement. And that day is coming sooner than we should like to think. That's why they're making huge investments and buddying up with Brazil. They're going to third world countries and putting in ports and railroads so that they can just completely replace the United States of America. And in the meantime, they've got us over a barrel now on a lot of these inputs. I know why we went there, because of the cost of manufacturing. I believe it was a almost near fatal error, or it will be a near fatal error if we don't get the stuff pulled out of there quickly. So that's the supply chain issue. You got containers that are 5 to 7 times more expensive to ship them across the pond. You've got near shortages or supply issues on a lot of plastics and resins that would then make the containers, the plastic bottles and jars, jugs that we haul this stuff in. And then you've got the issue of imports and a lot of friction right there. So I think there's going to be a tough time for ag. I think we're going to be going without some inputs next year. Yeah. Then Okay, then when you think about what's going to happen at the consumer level, because the person that lives next to me in Phoenix, Arizona, doesn't give two hoots in hell about whether a farmer can get his hands on glyphosate or not. Frankly, they don't even understand it. But what they do understand is when they go to the grocery store and they see price increases, which we obviously are having. The government can try and say that we only have 5% inflation, or I guess in August they said it was 8.2 or 8.8%. Some of us, just us lowly bachelor degree agricultural economist types. I started calling this a year and a half ago. I said, you can't throw billions and billions and billions of free money out there and not create inflation. We've made it so that the cost of work, you can get $600 a week to not work. So what does that make the cost of work worth? So we de facto did do a minimum wage increase. The left, the political left, really wanted that to happen. They've been pushing for minimum wage to $15 forever. So that how magically they came up with giving people $600 a week is exactly $15 times 40 hours. So these things have real life impacts. Again, the law of unintended consequences. When you are paying people to not work, that means it increases the price of labor. A guy that that farms my land milks cows, 2,500 cows to be exact. A lot of cows. So he's got a lot of hired people. The base level job when you show up at this dairy farm is they'll teach you how to wash the teats and put milkers on cows. They pay those people $13.50 plus housing. If you can get $15 to sit at home and watch Price is Right, why would you ever go milk cows for $13.50?
Well, that's it.
And so the point is, if he's double minimum wage now, that means if he has to double minimum wage again, he's going to be at $30 plus housing. What's that do to a price of milk? Well, in the short term, it might put him out of business, or a lot of dairy farms out of business. And when that happens, then when all of a sudden a gallon of milk goes from $2.19 at Safeway or whatever it is down there, Winn-Dixie, Peoples, whatever your grocery stores are there in Florida.
Yeah.
When it goes to $5, then people start saying, what the hell happened? Because this thing tends to be a big surprise. The average person is not economically oriented. They behave economically. They make their decisions based on economics, but they don't think long-term what's going to happen. So we're going to have some real issues there. I just use an example of milk and the guy that milks my cows. Let's say everybody says, oh, well, you know what? I don't feel bad for him. One of those factory farmers being mean to those cows, which of course is not true. Those cows are in better shape than any cow was ever on our small dairy farm growing up because they have hoof treatments and they have protocols and they have nutritions. Anyway, let's take it to meat. We got the same issue right now. An article in the Wall Street Journal about Tyson. Tyson is pushing through this whole vaccine mandate for their employees. But they still have an issue of employees not showing up. They're trying to say it's because they're not healthy or they're afraid to work. The truth is, why would you go and process chickens in a stinky chicken processing facility if you can get paid to not have to? Mm-hmm. Tyson says they are spending 6 days of work now to get 5 days of output pre this whole nonsense. So you're talking about major issues when the number one chicken processing company, one of the biggest protein companies on the planet, is now at 5/6 of capacity. What are you really going to see? Well, you're going to see price increases. The Biden administration came out last week and said we should tackle this. Those Biden people said that, you know what, those meat companies are gouging the consumer. Well, the reality is if you don't have people showing up, your facilities are running at about 80 to 85% of, capacity, you're going to end up having to absorb that somehow. So I think we're really going to see this entire thing is going to come back to higher prices for everybody, which is what inflation times look like.
That's it. And why we can see it, why and they can't. It's just that's something that just blows me away. It's just been so obvious over the last year and a half what's going to happen. And now it's happening and people are, looking around, how did this happen? Right? It's just crazy. But what do you think?
Like I said, most people, they when they get hit with it, it's kind of like the Three Little Pigs, Chrissy, about the straw house, the twig house, and the brick house. They will lazily accept the straw house all day long. And then when the big bad wolf blows it down, they just act surprised that this would ever happen. Well, this is what's happening right now. These government policy oftentimes seeks to circumvent the power of economic forces. And sometimes you just can't do that. Minimum wages, rent caps, all these things are essentially attempts to distort what economic forces would have happen. And again, using the Tyson example, eventually when they either had to, what's the answer then? Humans eat less chicken. Let's just put this, long term. Mm-hmm. They pay more or they eat less. That's about your two options, right? And so or Tyson has to figure out a way then to build another building that can only run at 82% capacity because they're spending 6 days to get 5 days worth of output because employees are not showing up. I mean, that's where this thing
or
goes.
More automation. Right?
Or more automation, which is coming. And that was coming anyhow. What tends to happen then is automation gets ramped up really quickly. Take World War II. We were already, an industrial, powerhouse, the United States of America in 1941. Well, all of a sudden you send a few million, young working age men all around the globe to go and get shot at. Somebody's got to still make the stuff. So, Rosie the Riveter, women for the first time then, really en masse went to the factories. Well, also that still wasn't enough. So a tremendous amount of automation was forced. It's the old thing, necessity is the mother of invention. So is that going to happen? We started seeing this 1.5 years ago when meat facilities shut down because of worker issues on their health. So can it happen quickly? Yeah, it probably will. The plant protein people would love for this to be a real open door for them. And they thought that it was. Remarkably, still hasn't really caught on. Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger, they're still around 1% or less of protein consumption in the United States of America.
Right.
I believe that some plant-based protein is coming, and it might be a function of higher meat prices. Whether the Biden administration can smack those companies on the hands hard enough to make them lower their prices or not is probably not really going to happen. So there could be an opportunity for some plant proteins, but I don't think it's going to be the Beyond Burger or the Impossible. I think those are kind of like MySpace. Remember 20 years ago, everybody said 15 years ago, we're all going to have social media and then MySpace. Well, who the hell's on MySpace now? I don't even know if it exists. Yeah. Maybe Impossible Burger and Beyond are the MySpace of plant-based protein.
That's a good point.
I believe it could be. Yeah. I believe it could be plant-based proteins that are the lentils and the beans. I had a Canadian entrepreneur on my podcast about 2 months ago, and his company is going public. And they're more like plant-based high-protein pastas and things like this. And the idea is if there's this environmental reason you don't eat meat, or there's this I'm humane, I don't eat meat, or more importantly, it might end up being meat's damned expensive now because of all these problems we have. Maybe the person says, but I still want protein. And you know what? That Impossible Burger is gross. Burger's burger. That ain't a burger. But I could eat this high protein pasta. So that's where I think maybe this thing is going. And there's probably an open door for them right now if we are going to see these prices remain. Another thing the Biden administration says they're going to do is throw money at meat processing to encourage expansion of smaller facilities. And that's neat. I take my steers to a place down the road. That's cool. But if they go from killing a dozen steers a week to 18, that still is a spit in the wind compared to the 6,000 steers per day that are getting processed in Dodge City, Kansas, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So if you're speaking to farmers and manufacturers directly, what do you think it's important to consider as they move forward?
Well, on the price input thing, I don't know how you get around it. I mean, if you're a farmer and you're doing a good job, you should spend as much time at your desk as you do in the shop. I always say there's the hide in the shop farmer that wants to go out and keep taking stuff apart and putting it back together again. That's nice. That's cool. That wouldn't be me because I'm not really into wrenching on stuff too much. But if you're at your desk, you're paying attention to what you can do about getting inputs bought. I know you can buy inputs ahead, meaning if you're going to have a fat year, which you are this year, with the exception of tree, fruits, and feed yards. Those are the two places that are hurting. And I'm talking about beef Beef feeders and tree products, I'm told, are where the struggle is, from nuts to fruits, to live on the hoof beef. But aside from that, pretty much everybody else is making pretty good money. So you have a chance here to prepay or pre-buy your inputs for next year. And it's to maybe avoid some more risk on the upside on pricing, but also to guarantee supply. Make sure you have the stuff.
That's a good advice there.
If you're going to experiment and say, I'm going to do a year where I don't use this, this, and this, or I'm going to do a year where I put in cover crops, and I hope that then by using deep-rooted radishes, I'm bringing up more fertility from that, subsoil horizon. And by golly, maybe that, along with the aspect of the green manure vegetation, I can cut back on fertilizer usage. That's maybe an option. If you had an option to sort of experiment with something new that you could get by with less inputs. From the manufacturing standpoint, and again, this is anecdotal. So I know there's empirical evidence and there's anecdotal evidence. So I'm going to give you anecdotal on this one, that a John Deere facility essentially has a combine sitting there that's just become their parts combine. They're almost becoming their own salvage yard, as ridiculous as that sounds, where they're saying, hey, we can't get parts because the supply chain issue is all over. Yeah. Again, we talked about those ignorant consumers that they assume that they sat around and watched Netflix for 8 months and kind of half-ass worked, and they assume that somehow everybody else was just chugging along. And then all of a sudden it's like, what do you mean there's no piston heads for my combine? What do you mean there's no replacement concaves for my, what do you think was happening? If you weren't doing work, why would you think that other people were? So that's where this thing's really smacking us in the face.
Yeah, for sure.
Frankly, I think it's a testament to our economic system that we've withstood it as well as we have. Now, the other part about the manufacturers, let's say you don't have to tear apart your combine to make it for parts. One thing about North American agriculture and Canada, United States, you can even talk about certainly Europe, Brazil. We are very well automated. You talk about automation. Mm-hmm. And also we're pretty darn well equipped. When you've got large scale farmers that are whacking out their harvest in 14 days time, it's not that catastrophic. And I'm not being insensitive to what's going on. Yeah. If you do have a problem because you're a little shorthanded, or you do have a supply chain problem, or you can't get your hands on a whatchamajigit, if it adds 3 more days, that's not probably going to make you lose the farm, right? I mean, you're not going to be now going bankrupt because of something being extended. So the good news is, because we've been so modernized and well equipped, if we end up adding a couple of days or do have to factor in a couple of inefficiencies, it's probably not going to, break us.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. One thing I've kind of noticed over the last year too is that a lot of manufacturers have a long list of customers, and they feel very, very busy and feel like things are just flying off the shelves, and it's a really great year. But I wonder about the future, if they're not planning for what's going to happen in a year, in 2 years, thinking that we're kind of riding this out and it's positive. I know a lot of salespeople that are having record years.
Yeah.
So, what caution do you give to those people?
Yeah, well, save your money. I quit corporate in 1994 and started my own business. I started out as a political comedian, and I've been through some ups and downs. I've had other various business ventures and investments over the years. And I can tell you that the one thing that's always made it so that I could live to fight another day is kind of my thing. My wife says to me a couple months ago, got another new little thing going with business. She says, Damian, they will knock you down, but they will never knock you out. And I think that's the thing, is you keep getting back up off the canvas and say, I'm here to fight another day. So what do? Yeah, you're that sales rep that just is saying, oh my God, things are going crazy. All this pent up demand. Well, first off, we are heading into inflationary times. $100,000 is very likely going to feel a lot like $90,000 here in another few months. That's just the reality of what inflation is doing. Save your money. realize that we are in this sort of oddball situation. I just got some wood mulch tree trimmings dropped off here. A guy here in my community trims trees. And so I said, I got a lot of stuff out here. I go and put this wood chips down because it's free, so it's basically mulch you don't have to pay for because it's not the pretty dyed kind.
Right.
I was just dropping that off an hour ago. And I said, you having a hard time keeping help? He said, I'm having a hard time getting people that'll show up every day. He says, I've got 4 guys that basically amounts to a 2-man crew because, when they show, when they don't show. So small business people like him, there's a lot of folks that sat around and they got bailout money or they got, whatever these different things that the government's throwing out, money like it was candy. And then they looked around and said, you know what? We ought to trim up those trees. Let's call Mike's Tree Service. And then Mike says, God, my phone's ringing off the hook. Now I can't get people to help me come out here and trim up these trees. So it's happening everywhere. Yeah. So what's your advice? I guess your advice is write it out as best you can, and of course, I say always save and invest your money and realize that there's no guarantees. The other thing is, and this is where a lot of folks screw up. It's the old thing about they get a little bit complacent. I was going to say the word lazy. That sales rep you're talking about is closing all kinds of deals. They aren't really prospecting new business right now because they say, why do I need to do that? I'm busy as can be. Mm-hmm. And then it's the old thing, dig your well before you're thirsty. 2 years from now, 3 of those companies are now consolidated down to just 2, or they find a new vendor or whatever that thing is. So we try to always, my wife and I here with my speaking business or my other interests, we never get so cocky that we think we're too busy to return calls. We never get to where we think that we're too cool to return that email. We try to always be responsive as realizing that I came up in showbiz, so I always remember that you're only as good as your last show. That's a very famous statement that they make in showbiz. You're only as good as your last show, so I try to always remember that they could all end. It could all slow down. It's important to do that.
Yeah, that's definitely some good advice. And then going back to ag policy a little bit, Biden's proposed tax changes are frightening to the farm family, at the very least. So, what's your take on that issue? And is there hope for the family farm?
Yeah, and I've read a few different articles on this, and I'm certainly not an estate expert. Depending on what the limits are. We've had this thing before and after and back and forth. There was a time here just a few years ago where it kept climbing, meaning you had no estate tax due, Chrissy, until after like $11.5 million. I'm thinking was the numbers, like in that 11 to 12 million range somewhere in there. Okay. Then somehow it expired and then dropped to $1 million. So just think of this. You've worked, you and your spouse have worked like hell out here and you've done the right thing, and you fed the pigs and you paid down the debt. You did all that. And then you got this, few farms, your estate is worth, say, $5 million. You're like, hey, I'm under the limit. Oh, wait, until January 1st, then it drops to 1 million. So they've changed this estate tax thing around so much. Yeah. I don't know where it's going to end up because nothing's official yet. And so even an estate planning attorney right now would say, we're just going with what the law currently is. If you ask an attorney, they'll say, well, here's what might happen, but we can't really rework your estate based on what might happen. Right. So is it going to be this huge thing where a bunch of farms have to liquidate? It doesn't probably look that way. I'd imagine if you're in that realm of having, $10 or $20 million worth of agricultural assets, you sure as hell should be meeting with a good estate attorney and putting things into trusts or whatnot. There's the only issue of control. Like, I don't have children. My wife and I have a decent net worth and we own some property and things like this. So sometimes there's the family that has all that. And then they're like, well, if I start apportioning stuff up to Junior, and then all of a sudden, what's the old thing they always say? It's not the in-laws. The in-laws are the outlaws. I apportion stuff to Junior, and then Junior's spouse all of a sudden says, you're the hell out of here. So I think there's going to be some of those horror stories more than there will actually be true devastation. It just depends on where the level comes out.
Yeah.
They've blown a lot of money. And the one thing that the governments do, and whether it's at the city, the state, the local, or the federal level, they blow the money and then they go about figuring out where they can confiscate somebody else's money to pay for their programs. So they will probably make it hard on agriculture, but it depends on where that level comes in. And I got to tell you, I'm as conservative as anybody. I'm very libertarian, in fact. I generally oppose all taxation. I oppose property taxation. If the government has a lien on my farm every 6 months, then do I really own anything? So that being said, estate taxes, and this was said by like Warren Buffett, I think a decade or so ago in an article I read. The one thing about estate taxes at some level, if you don't have some level of that, then you end up very quickly in a sort of feudal system where it's kings and queens and then the rest of us peasants, because if they can pass on hundreds of millions of dollars, which they already do with the different structures and the way they do things, what chance do we ever have? How do I ever buy the farm down the road when it's just continually being accumulated by this massive amount of sort of modern day aristocracy? So there is, as much as I hate to say it, there is an argument to be made for some level of estate taxation, only in that it makes it so that Bill Gates, who's already figured out enough methods to sort of put the ledger more on his favor, it does make it a little bit so that they're not just going to continue to accumulate that. So, yeah, that's about it. Long story, long answer to not really give you any concrete answer. I know, Chrissy.
Right. Yeah, no, it's all good stuff to think about, though. There's a lot in there. And, we're kind of just along for the ride right now, figuring out what's going to happen and speculating at this point.
I mean, that's one of many things with what's going on right now. They're talking about $3.5 trillion of what they call an infrastructure package, and it doesn't look a bit like infrastructure, as you and I well know, or anything that we would have defined as infrastructure up until this whole thing. So remember what they do when they want to push through spending, they just redefine the terms, right?
Something more palatable for the commoners, right?
Yeah. So the point is they're going to have to pay for this. So there's no way that taxes can't go up. I mean, again, you talk about the people that just seem oblivious to all this. Like, how would you come up with $6 trillion? It's a number that you can't even comprehend, right?
Yeah.
How would you come up with that without increasing tax revenue? And so
something's got to pay for it. Yeah, for sure. And kind of changing tracks. You wrote a blog earlier this year, and it was titled "Time for Ag to Change the Curriculum of Educating the Consumer." And I just want to know what you mean by that, because I agree with that. And I just want to hear what you think.
Yeah. So the concept I had with changing the curriculum of educating the consumer, we have been saying this for a long, long time. And I'm 52 years old. I've been to ag events since I was a little boy. The machinery dealer would put out ham sandwiches and show you a film, or they'd have the local ag broadcaster from the AM radio station come in and talk. And the themes that we usually hear a lot of in ag, Chrissy, and I kind of ruffle some feathers when I say this. We've told them how lucky they are that we feed them. If you ate today, thank a farmer. Thank a farmer. Well, you know what? If you farmed it today, thank a consumer. Yeah. There's two sides to this, right? I also do I need to thank the 13-year-old kid in Bangladesh that made my shoes? I mean, let's be honest here. Who all are we going to thank? There's that. And then there's the other thing we love to say at ag meetings is talk about educating the consumer. Just got to educate the consumer. You know what we need to do? We got to go out there and educate the consumer. And I do have a big social media following, and I am active out here as a media, sometimes in the media ag guy. And I'm happy to tell my friends in the suburbs of Arizona about what happens in agriculture. But this idea that we think it means we're just going to keep doing what we want to do. As long as we tell you why we're doing it, you're going to let us do it. Right. Well, I'm not sure that's going to fly, because we live in an environment of environmentalism. We've got organizations that believe just because you own that field right there doesn't mean that you have the right to pollute my river. And so, and there's a case to be made for that. The consumer does increasingly believe that they should have control over a lot of things that we didn't think that they should. So when we keep talking about educating the consumer, what that usually means is it's ag people saying, we want to just keep doing things the way we do it. As long as we tell you why, then you'll just shut the hell up and be happy and thank a farmer. And I would counter that with maybe it's time, Chrissy, that we think, all right, first off, when you say educate the consumer, we're implying that they are ignorant. And maybe they are. Let's face it, they don't know a lot about what happens out here at the farm gate. But it's also on the verge of insulting. What if I came to your farm and said, you know what? I'm just going to educate you about what happens in the city. You'd be like, who the hell do you think you are? Well, again, look at it from their side. There's the other part of it that presumes that they care. Now, this is the one that a lot of ag people don't get, and I do ruffle some feathers. If you go to the store and generally you have everything you want, and you spend 6.4% of your food, of your income on food, which is what it is on average in the United States of America, less than that for wealthy people, more than that percentage for poorer people, as you might imagine. But if you're spending 6.5% of your income on food, the grocery store generally has everything you want. Even with hiccups here in the last year and a half, you still pretty much, had what you want. Why would you care? I point this out all the time. I got a cell phone right here. It's a smartphone. It's a wonderful piece of equipment, right? It does all kinds of stuff. It's smarter than the Apollo space program 50 years ago. I don't know how it works. I know how to use it. I know how to use it for my work, but I don't know how the technology in here works. So if Apple thought that, hey, just imagine, Chrissy, Apple, one of the biggest tech companies on the planet said, hey, you know what? We're going to make this and you're not going to like it. But by God, we're going to tell you how we did it because that's educating the consumer. You'd say, screw you. I'll just go get a Samsung. I don't need educated. I just want it to work. That's kind of our consumer when it comes to their groceries.
Right.
So
they want it on the shelf.
Yeah, we're hung up over here on educating. It's fine to let them know what happens out here, and it's good to have that communication. It just needs to be, we go overboard on this. Educate the consumer. Like maybe the consumer doesn't care. Do you care how your phone was made? Ask that question, and it's a great comparison.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I think I think we really do get stuck in that rut of education, and it's important. But I really like that perspective. Because we have to keep being creative. Yeah. And you are also the host of 2 podcasts. Can you tell me a little bit about the 2 podcasts?
Yeah. So if you're watching this, dear viewer or listener, it's the Business of Agriculture with Damian Mason. It's my backdrop right here. You can go to DamianMason.com and you can find all my stuff. I do the Business of Agriculture comes out every week. I do another one that's geared to small biz-minded folks called Do Business Better. I have a book called Do Business Better. I guess I can pull that up and show your viewers right here. It looks a little bit like this. So the 2 podcasts, if you are an ag person, which I know we've got machinery people and farmers that love them that are listening to your program here, you'd ought to really think about your business and always view it from an outside perspective. That's what we seek to do with the Do Business Better podcast. On the Business of Agriculture podcast, I try to bring in a lot of different angles, everything from the regenerative farming to chemical manufacturers, from direct-to-consumer agriculture to greenhouses to feed yard operators. So we bring in a lot of different angles, and we always try to keep it about the heady part of it, the business part of it, the things that maybe you kind of didn't know about, the things that you'd like to know more about. So it's a lot of fun doing that. And I gotta say, I've learned a lot just by hosting it. I mean, I'm sure you do also. The more of these people you have on, the more you're like, I hadn't thought of that. That's a good point.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I have one last question for you. What fires you up? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
Yeah, that's a tough part because I got to say with this last year and a half, a lot of things changed, and that combined with where I am in my life. When I was 30, it was all about go out there and slay those dragons and prove that you can. And then now, we're in a little different realm because, I've had a certain degree of financial success. So you can't just always think, it's just about making the dollar. So now it's more about, I want to do more and more of the things of my choosing. I want to do more and more of the thing that is got Damian on it versus, this is obligation. And there's also a little bit of a change. I've heard this said before. Tomorrow, I could say I have to go to Florida to speak for the Florida Fruit and Vegetable Association. Or I could say I get to go to Florida to speak to the Florida Fruit and Vegetable Association. There is a I guess a good mental health thing that we should do, where we actually think about what we do as more and more doing it by choice versus that you have to. I was a factory worker when I was 19 years old, working the midnight shift in a dusty, dirty place that made you itch. And I don't have to do that anymore. And that's a good thing. So what fires me up is still the pursuit of doing life and business more and more on my terms versus on someone else's. And I think that if you can do more and more things on your terms versus by someone else's, then that's a good day, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you've got that dead on, I would say. That's awesome. So thank you so much for joining me today, Damian. There's a lot going on in the world. I really appreciate your analysis.
I appreciate you having me on, and tell your viewers here, check me out at DamianMason.com, and I hope that we can be of service to them. So thanks a lot.
Absolutely. And thanks to everyone who's watching or listening. If you want more information, all the links will be posted in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe to North American Ag Spotlight YouTube channel. And podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Amazon, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And have a great day. Thanks so much for listening to today's Ag Spotlight episode, where we put the spotlight on people and companies doing great things for the agricultural industry. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Stitcher, or on your favorite podcasting platform, and give us a 5-star review. You can also follow us on YouTube and Rumble to see the video version of Ag Spotlight. Also, head on over to NorthAmericanAg.com to subscribe to our Industry Connect update newsletter. If you're interested in advertising opportunities, email us at connect@NorthAmericanAg.com. Thanks for listening.